Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. So we've been doing what's becoming an interview series that we've been recording that you will be able to hear coming up in a few podcasts. I'm not 100% sure.
We're working on the scheduling of it all.
Soonish. We'll be rolling out the series of interviews of people of different types and their experience of being those types. And the one thing that has been a consistent theme so far, it might not end up all 16 individuals re-interview, we'll say this, but so far, every single person started out being mistyped. That was their point of origin. They discovered type. They were given a type based on one person, it was like an official indicator report. For another person, it was like, a website with a test. But all of them ended up being different best fit types than what they started out to as their point of origin. So then we talk a little bit about the journey. Okay, so talk about the journey between you discovering type and you finding your best fit type. And for some, they go through multiple different types. For others, it was just the original one was inaccurate, and then they discovered their accurate type later. But it seems that for most people, that original mistype wasn't the end of the world.
Yeah.
It was okay. It was, in some cases, it was what they needed to hear at that moment.
Well, in some report that they actually started down a growth path with that as an understanding. So I think I'm this type XYZ. I'm going to start growing using the tools that type would use. And that was even interesting hearing some of those experiences.
Yeah. Although, they realized in retrospect, well, I thought I was developing this one function, but it actually ended up being that I was developing my functions, but thinking that they were a different function, which I think happens a lot. But I thought about this. I think, okay, so if you've heard the podcast much, you know that I'm not a big fan of running around calling out other people as being mistyped. I'm not a fan of that at all. It's my least favorite aspect of type communities, is particularly if somebody has any sort of attention for their content. It's basically predictable that somebody will run around talking about how that person doesn't know their personality type, and I'm just not a fan.
It'd be like a comedian accusing other comedians of stealing jokes all the time, or misrepresenting some kind of comedy all the time.
Yeah, it just feels like a lazy way of getting attention, honestly. That said, there is some concern that people have in multiple communities because, there's a lot of different type communities sort of running. There are legitimate concerns that people have that if a person is mistyped, then they're going to not get the benefit of the system. They'll not get the benefit of all of the information. And so making sure that people know that their best fit type is of primary concern. And I understand that, if I start to think about it in terms of what's the real value out of this system, is it finding your type or is it all the stuff that happens after you find your type? I generally think most of the time, the value in the system comes after you've discovered your own best fit type, because now you have something to work with and you can rest into understanding how you're wired. Everybody that talked about being mistyped originally, they said they could see aspects of themselves in those descriptions, but it wasn't quite right. And when they found their best fit type, now it felt like, basically like tailored clothes. It's like tailored for them. And suddenly everything becomes clear. And that's a really awesome moment, I think. If a person, especially if they've been struggling or had lots of confusion, that moment when you discover your best fit type and everything fits, that's a good moment. But that said, I have never gelled with this idea that it has to be found as soon as humanly possible. And if you suspect another person is mistyped, it is your responsibility to go correct them. I've just never gelled with that. And I didn't have a good reason why. There's something to be said, right? Like there's a lot of value that comes after knowing what your type is. So why is it that I personally it didn't make sense to me to turn this into the most important component of type? And I think for me, it comes down to how much value I have seen in people's journey of figuring out their type. There's a lot of content that happens, particularly from the moment a person gets their type, they receive it, it's a little off, maybe, or they can kind of see aspects or elements of it. Maybe they gerrymander a little of themselves to fit into the type they want to be, or maybe they're authentically and sincerely taking in the information and, connecting it to things that are honest for them, but it's just not quite right. From that moment to the moment that they find their best fit type can be sometimes days, weeks, months, years. It can come through their own self-discovery. It can come through a suggestion from another person in their life. It can come through content that they're consuming. But when I say the content of that journey, I mean there's like a lot of things that happen for an individual as they're going through the experience of point A to point B, right? Of finding that type. And so I think for me, as I'm trying to find the logic behind why it's just never, I don't know, it's never been a burr under my saddle. I think it comes down to, is there value in that journey? Is there enough value in that journey to make it so that it's not one's job to run around correcting everybody else? Like, is there something really good that comes or positive that comes from the time period of the timeline of finding one's best fit type?
What I hear you saying, Antonia, is there's value in knowing your type, because then you can get started on the work of growing yourself. Like if I know I'm an ENFP, which I am in the Myers-Briggs system, this is how I identify, that's what I see, that's what my preference is. Now I can go, okay, here's where I got to grow, here's what I got to do. And what I hear you saying is there's also value in maybe me, for some individuals, there's value in believing you're one type, and then through a process of discovery and trying to work with that and understand things and leaving yourself open to other possibilities, there's a lot of understanding about the self that can come from that too. And so what I think the immediate thing that strikes me, the reason why that you see that as valuable, is because it puts the Myers-Briggs system and personality type in general in its proper place. In that this is not a narrative that we have to live up to as a certain type. Understanding how our cognition is wired is a tool that we're using for another end to get toward. In other words, type is coming along in our journey, just like a bunch of other things. Our friend Aranio Pius talks about all personal growth requires more than one tool. This is one tool among many that you will use in your life to grow yourself, to hook yourself to becoming an increasing better version of yourself toward the future. And so it puts it into a place of going, well, it is about getting the correct type, because there's a bunch of stuff that can happen after that, but we're process focused. What are you learning and growing around, regardless of how you've identified with personality type? It really puts it in its proper place. It doesn't elevate it to this status of like royalty or reverence in almost a religious way. It's just a tool like any other tool, and you're using it in whatever way you're using it as a person right now to discover your best fit type. And wow, that's amazing, because there's a bunch of stuff you're going to learn in that process.
Yeah. In one of these conversations that's coming up, there is a person that mistyped themselves, or was typed, I think, by an online test somewhere. Or maybe it was a career test. I don't remember. But whatever the point of origin was, they were mistyped as an INFJ. And they said that at the time that happened, the recommendation because they were a podcast listener, the recommendation was to develop your extroverted feeling or harmony co-pilot or auxiliary cognitive function. And there was a lot of messaging around making sure that you're getting your needs met, that you're setting healthy boundaries, that you make sure that that's what's going, that you take yourself into account and into consideration. And they said, well, I'm not an INFJ, but I needed to hear all those messages. I needed to hear because they were going through burnout and they had overextended themselves. Now they're a different type and they had overextended themselves for non-INFJ reasons. But at that moment, they needed to hear, oh, I need to set better boundaries, and I need to make sure that I'm getting my needs met. And then over time, when they said that they were trying to do, that co-pilot work, they realized in retrospect, oh, I was actually developing the function that I'm supposed to be developing. I was actually developing my co-pilot, thinking I was developing extroverted feeling. And I think that that's common, right? Especially if we're still trying to wrap our head around all of these different elements of the system, because the system it's more and less complex than we give it credit for. It's more complex in a way where there are variables and modifiers that make it so that a person can maybe get the wrong angle on a certain function, thinking that it's actually what turns out to be a relationship between two other functions, right? Like there are things like that that can happen. Like sometimes extroverted thinking looks like a combination of extroverted feeling and introverted thinking together, right? Or whatever. There's like these complications that can sometimes arise from having a partial understanding and awareness of how all of this works. But at the same time, it's also simpler in the sense that as a tool that we can use for ourselves, right? Like it serves us. It also can be a tool where we understand elements and components of ourselves that maybe aren't a one-to-one correlation with, like if you have a better understanding, if you have a better awareness, you're like, oh, that actually definitely was extroverted thinking or whatever. But for the time, it was okay that you misunderstood it, and it was still valuable and it still had utility. And so the simple component or the simple piece is that it's an attempt to become more and more aware of the unconscious aspects of who we are. We're digging into a concept of self, and we're trying to get in there to figure out all these things that do they have patterns to them, or is this something that I can understand on a more concrete level? Can I figure out who I am with a model that has created words and definitions around this? And can I unearth all these pieces of who I am that I never had a reason to even look at them before? There was nothing even telling me where to look. I think personality type systems, we of course focus on Jungian cognitive functions and the emergent types from those. But whether you're talking about Enneagram or just about any other personality type system, they're giving you cookie crumb trails to look at aspects of your unconscious mind or to unearth things that before may have simply been feeling like these are just autoresponders, like these are just ways that I show up. Well, now I'm looking at why I'm showing up that way, or what are the mechanisms going on underneath it. And that can happen regardless of whether or not you have your best fit type perfect. Like just the activity of going in itself can be incredibly powerful. So I sometimes wonder if that journey has its own utility. I think we've mentioned this in the podcast before, but the word I always use is the thrashing. Like there's like a thrashing that happens when you're trying to figure out your type. And you're trying to triangulate all these pieces of information. You're trying to triangulate what you know about yourself, what you're discovering about yourself, what other people know about you, and this system that doesn't care, right? The system that is its own system that lives outside of all of this. And you're trying to find the intersection between all of these points. And that is a complex, that can be complicated. It can take a while. And sometimes it doesn't feel so good. Sometimes it's like, oh, I can't find my type. I can't figure out what my type is. And then, and does that mean I don't understand myself very much? Does that mean that I don't know myself? Does that mean I'm not smart enough to figure the system out? And a person can get filled with doubts and uncertainty around all of it, when really it might just be you're going through a time period in your life where you're discovering more. Or there are aspects of yourself you're very familiar with, but now you're learning other aspects that you never even knew where to look. And sometimes it's that the system is becoming more clear to you because it is complex and it takes a while to master it. And that time period of triangulating all those different elements can be a time period of thrashing. And I suspect that more things get unearthed in that time period. Like there's almost a disadvantage to finding your type right away sometimes than if you had to go through all of these different potential identities or ways of understanding yourself and try them on and see how they fit.
I think there is a little bit of a challenge, though, in that space. It's a little bit of an ego hit if people around you, especially if you're into this, and the people around you are certain of who they are, and you're the one that's figuring this out still, or you're uncertain. Now, you might be certain about something. Like, I think some people are certain about their type and then realize, oh, maybe I'm a different type. So it's not like they're dealing with uncertainty. They're pretty certain, and then they get more information, they discover more about themselves, and they reevaluate how they're wired. So that's one type of person. The other type of person is the person that's a little confused and maybe feels deficient because friends and other people around them into this are certain and they don't feel certain. So there's like an unsettling nature to it. And it's a rush to feel complete or finished, I think, in a way. So you've got a couple different ones of these happening, but I think all of it can suffer from an ego challenge in that if I'm certain about my type on that side, and then through to self-discovery, I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe that's different, but maybe I've told everybody, and maybe I've even created content around it, or maybe I've really put myself out there. Well, now I've boxed myself in. My ego is like, oh, I don't know if I can switch that. And then the other side is I'm uncertain, and that's an ego hit too, because I feel like I'm showing up. I don't know myself. Everybody else seems so much more certain. I feel a little unsettled by that, and so it's also an ego hit. So I think our ego also jumps in here and makes this a challenge in all ways, and especially if you're outputting from a certain type, right? Your ego is like, oh man, you paint yourself into a corner, and now it's hard to reevaluate. But if you can get leverage on that, I think that's the other thing about the thrashing in this is it's also ego work that we can do in the thrashing moments. It's not just personal growth, but it's like really evaluating, why am I so driven to have this handled? Why do I have to be settled in this to be okay with myself in front of others? What if there's some mystery right now? What if I can just let that go and be present to the moment, present to who I am, not in personality type, but just being here and sitting with it? Why do I have to have this figured out to feel okay about myself is kind of the question. And I think that's a personal answer for each person. But I just want to highlight this is not an easy thing necessarily, the thrashing part. There's stuff that comes up in here that's challenging for each of us.
I think that's a great thing to point out because that's what's doing the thrashing is the ego. It's attempting to contend with itself in all these new pieces of information or maybe conflicting pieces of information. I don't think it helps when people in type communities run around trying to discredit each other either. Like that's not helpful because that also ends up encouraging an ego, interplay.
I don't think anyone approaches it with the motivation or the intent to say, I'm going to go undermine somebody. I think it's probably more the motivation intent to say, I'm really good look how good I am. Look how dominant I am in this area. I'm so good. I can figure out people's type almost in an instant from body language, or we go through and we that actor or actress is this or that person's this, or it really makes us feel good to be able to do that. I guess there is probably unconsciously some undermining of a person's type to get higher status or something, but I think it's ultimately trying to be the best at it, not to tell somebody else they're not the best at it.
I'd agree, and I think that that's good that you bring in the intention and motivation behind some of that action, because I don't usually think about intentions and motivations because I don't care. I'm just like, what's the result? What's going on? But I think you're right, and so it's maybe inevitable that people will end up doing it for that reason because there's really nothing else that tells people that they've mastered the system. Like what is the result? What are the observable evidences or proofs that a person has really mastered the system? And there's really not many. And so being able to correct others becomes like a signal of how much you've poured into this. Maybe for a lot of people, even just type enthusiasts, they've poured hundreds upon hundreds of hours thinking about the subject, reading about the subject, talking about it with people, trying to get everybody else interested in it so they can have the conversations, spending time online in type communities, going back and forth on, all these different theories and what they think. It's like, well, what if it works like this? Or what if it works like this? And so there's not a lot of ways to express the amount of hours you've put into doing this. And so I suspect that that idea of running around trying to prove how much you know, like you mentioned, it's not necessarily an attempt to undermine others. It's more of an attempt to express your investment, right? Your investment of attention.
Yeah. So every culture has its markers of status, right? We talked about this the other day. You were pointing out, Antonia, that in New York City, many people live in walk-up apartments hidden behind in a building somewhere. So it's hard, if you're living in rural Virginia in the United States, you can have this big house and display your wealth and all of your status in a big house or something with property. Whereas in New York City, it's harder to do that with your physical place unless people come into it. I guess you can do that, invite them over or showcase it in some way. But there's other markers, maybe social markers in New York City, for example, the way you dress, how much aggression you have of your success track, and the way you interact with people, the friends you have, the social circles you're in. These are all things that mark success more than like the big house in the countryside.
Or like how fast you have to walk because you're really busy and important.
Yeah, or something like that. So like there's probably markers in like a city like that. Now you might have a house outside the city to display wealth and status, but we all have these cultural markers. And maybe in a city like Washington, D.C., it would be it would be like the type of agency you work for, the type of community you're involved in or something. Because everybody gets paid roughly the same there because it's all government work, right? So
yeah, I think in places like LA, it's like zip code because it's so sprawling, or the kind of car you drive because it's a car culture.
So what I hear you saying then is in this world, in the type world, there are status markers of knowing what you're talking about, just like any social culture around the world. And in this world, the competency of I know what I'm talking about, this is correct, going around correcting people or doing that, which I don't think we're talking about that today, but that's something I think that shows status.
Well, I think the reason why I want to mention that is because it, like we're talking about right now, it might be inevitable that sort of thing shows up. And for somebody going through a type journey, a community that has that as the output of whether intentionally or unintentionally seeking to undermine other people's, expertise in this, when there's no real way to mark expertise otherwise, that is obvious, right? It's like it's hard to find obvious markers. It might be hard with an individual going through their own type journey or being mistyped or trying to figure it out or maybe reevaluating their type if they think that owning a different type than what they originally were is going to somehow indicate that they haven't put the hours in, that they don't have the mastery. Like what if somebody has put hundreds of hours in? Two people, they've done the exact same amount of reading. They actually, when it comes to the theoretical aspect of the systems, have the exact same amount of knowledge and understanding and insight. They have read all the books. They've, you know what I mean? Like they're actually at equal awareness and understanding of the system, but they are in a different moment of the timeline of their own personal journey. And one person is now ready to understand something about themselves they didn't understand before because maybe their age or the context they were in or whatever, or just a bunch of incidentals that have nothing to do with type. Suddenly they understand something about themselves and now they're reevaluating their personality type. The thrash might be that they just don't want to own that because now what if they're signaling the opposite, right? It's almost like the type world version of poverty. Right? They're like signaling, oh, well, you must not have known the system very well if you mistyped yourself, or you must not know yourself very well, or whatever. And they don't want to, I could imagine that being very difficult to own that experience, even though in my opinion, that's the actual marker of becoming more sophisticated in the system. Like having those ahas and insights and implementing it in your life. And having personal growth benefits and sort of the fruit of that, in my opinion, is actually the marker of sophistication with the system.
Of course it is, because you're a thinker. I'm sitting here like, what a thinker answer this is, right? Like competency and showcasing how much you know. And I'm thinking of myself and maybe other feelers I know that would just say, oh, I'm naturally talented at helping people determine type and understanding myself without training. That's how good I am. I didn't even need the training. So it's... for some people, including myself at times in the past, has been whatever the subject matter, it's been, no, I'm just naturally good at this. And I actually, around some subjects, I actually don't want to know how much I don't know because then it ruins my whole superiority complex around that thing. Type's different. I've gone deep into type, but there are aspects of things in my life that I just want to be the best at that in my own mind and heart.
I love that you're owning that.
And the more information I get, the more it proves I don't know that. So I'm going to actually not go do the research, not add more information, because now I've just knocked myself off a pedestal.
My introverted thinking or accuracy loves the fact that you say stuff like that. Because first of all, I love the transparency. But second of all, that's very representative of a lot of people who I don't think would own up to that. But that's not just feelers, that's thinkers too, right? We want to believe that we're naturally talented at something and I don't have to build the skill in it because I just have, I was born that way. I was just born being amazing at fill in the blank. And
sure.
And I love that you represented that part of each human being because we're all like that on some level.
Yeah. I think one would be maybe valuable is to think in terms of let's talk a little about, okay, maybe you're mistyped. You don't know it. You're listening, you're mistyped, you don't know it yet. Like you'll discover that at some point in the future. Or you're struggling. Are there ways to think about this that can still be helpful for us? So as an example, you and I, Antonia, do coaching with people. And sometimes we'll do a coaching session or arrangement with a particular personality type. We'll get 12 of a certain type together and do some really intense small group coaching. And invariably, a few people will show up maybe as a similar type or very close, but they're, from our estimation, having done this a long time, are like, that energy just doesn't feel like they're that type that they think they are coming to this workshop. So we as coaches are challenged because we have an ethic to not challenge people's best fit types in themselves. We can offer and say, hey, have you explored this aspect of yourself? But we really don't want to project something onto people, but we still need to work with a client and help them grow.
Yeah, it's not our job to try to hammer it into an individual that we think they're a different type. Sometimes we'll gently suggest, like, hey, have you given any consideration to this type? And if the person comes back and they're like, no, that is not me. It's like, okay, well, you know yourself better than I do. And either I'm wrong and you should be sticking to your guns, or you've got a journey ahead of you. And either way, that's okay, right?
Yeah. So what we typically do is we try to find advice and growth help we can give that person to meet them where they are in what they do understand about themselves and that we can also see. For example, say we have a group of introverts, a certain particular introvert type, and we notice that the person that shows up is, in our estimation, is probably an introvert, but they might be have a different configuration than the other introverts in the group. Well, everybody's work in some way is going to be extroverted because an introvert means that you probably favor that attitude. You probably have to get into your co-pilot cognitive function, which is going to be extroverted if you're an introvert. So we know that. So some of the recommendations for that person could be become more extroverted, do more extroverted things. Now, they might be wired, they might have to struggle with doing that because it may not be the exact thing to land for their function if they're mistyped, but they get into an extroverted space and they'll probably kind of find themselves to that function somehow because that's the natural way they're wired. So we can just help them get to the extroverted attitude. Well, now they have a growth path regardless of their type. So maybe we could talk a little about some of these things. Are there things that people could still think about doing regardless if, I think some people are worried, like, I'm mistyped. If I do all this growth, is it the wrong thing? Or I'm struggling. How can I grow until I land on this? I've been working for this for 5 years and I'm so eager to grow, which could be an unconscious strategy, by the way, potentially. But I want to grow, but I need to determine which type I am first before I go down this path. And I'm frustrated and I struggle with it. So I think that's some things that we could potentially articulate on this show.
Yeah. You mean like it might be a strategy to kick the can of growth down the road?
Oh, well, it could be like I can see somebody like struggling with their type because unconsciously they know the moment they land on that type, there's a bunch of growth that they have to do that will kick off a bunch of changes in their life they're not ready for. So it's a convenient unconscious struggle. I don't know what type I am. Well,
right.
It keeps delaying getting into the growth frame, right?
Right. It obfuscates.
And I'm doing a good work. I'm trying to figure out who I am. It's noble. So I can delay that growth for now because I'm trying to figure this out first, and then it goes on forever,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can come at type from two different directions. You can come at it from a direction of like, I want to know this information because I want to grow and become a better version of myself, etc. Or you can get into type just because you're interested in type and you don't give two craps about growth and development, which is totally fine too. Like a person doesn't have to marry type and growth. We do because we're interested in it, but that's just us, right? And usually we tend to attract people who want to come at it from that angle as well. And also you don't have to.
Some people collect hammers, but most people use them to build stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Most people use hammers, but there's somebody out there that just collects hammers. They love to study hammers. They love to buff them and shine them and present them on their wall. They have a hammer collection that everybody loves. Like, don't you love my hammer collection? It's like all these different hammers from around the world and different materials.
And then above the collection is a sign that they've had hand carved that says hammer time.
That's right.
I want to know this person. If you're that person, please write in.
But most people use hammers as
Right.
Most people aren't hammer timing it. They're like, they're actually using the hammer for it as a tool for something else in their life.
Well, and to be fair, there are other applications other than just personal growth and development. There's also like greasing the wheels of relationships with other people and trying to figure out others so that you can meet them halfway. And I wouldn't call that necessarily personal growth, although
I think it is.
Yeah, but I think it ends up being something that, unless you're using it for evil, and then we don't like you.
Unless
and
you're
we
Facebook.
Yeah. We don't
I mean,
like
Meta or whatever you're called now.
how you're using it. Right, exactly.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
So to go back to the original question.
Did I completely derail you, Antonia? Did you lose the thread?
I'm mildly derailed, but I'm going back to the original question, which was the question of how, if you are mistyped and you don't know it yet, but that awareness is coming for you, and you're going to be entering that phase unbeknownst to you right at this moment, but you end up in that phase at some point soon, or you're currently in the thrash, how can you see this so that you don't get so discouraged? Because I think that's really what we're talking about, how to move through all of this stuff without being totally discouraged. And there's a couple different things that come to me. The first one is that you are already, like, I would take strength in this idea that you are already using a tool, again, that helps you unearth things to make the unconscious conscious. And that takes time, right? Like, people have been going to psychoanalysts for 100 years or more to be able to dig into the psyche, which is still a mystery for the most part, right? And humans have been studying the psyche for as long as we've been, conscious. So we're not talking about simple things, right? This is not just, taking an engine apart, which is a complicated thing in and of itself. But once you understand how engines work, you know how engines work. The brain is its own different ball of wax. So give yourself a little bit of space and time and patience as all of this is happening, because you're talking about the most complicated machine that is known in the universe. The second thing is that finding your best fit type, again, this is something that serves you. You don't serve it. So when you land on it, it's something that's supposed to enhance your life. It's supposed to enhance everything. And I feel like what ends up happening when people land on a type and it kind of feels right is there's a moment when you have your true best fit type that is hard to explain when you're trying on any of the other 15. It's a moment of rightness. It feels like it was tailored to your, to your psyche, right? Kind of like clothes are tailored to your body. Like if you have a tailor that is making an outfit that is designed for your specific body, it's going to feel very different than something you get off the rack. Even if something that you get off the rack feels good, right? Like it looks, I go shopping off the rack, right? And I'm like, this one looks better than maybe the other shirt I wore. And so this one feels pretty good. This must be the right shirt. But that's a totally different experience than having a tailor make a shirt for you. So as you're going through all of these different types, might I encourage you to seek the one that just has everything make sense, right? Like the whole thing feels like it fits. And I've observed oftentimes that's a type that the individual hasn't even let themselves consider. Now, it might be because it's a sensory type and there's a lot of intuitive type bias in a lot of communities. And so a person will be like, well, I can't be a sensor. I must be one of those special intuitives. I got to tell you, there's nothing that special about intuitives. And I say that as somebody who's created a lot of content to say to intuitives, okay, you guys are valuable. You guys are cool. Like, calm down. It's going to be fine. Like there's a lot of place for you in the world, even if you feel like you've been perpetually rejected. Intuitives have a tendency to want to feel special because they have felt rejected in the past, and this is an attempt to balance the scales. But as far as intrinsic coolness or intrinsic specialness, it's not intrinsic, all right? It's more just a difference, and it's a different set of skills that a person or talents a person is bringing to the table. But it doesn't mean that God loves you more if you're an intuitive, right? Like the universe has not blessed you by being an intuitive, and I say that as somebody who's an intuitive. There's a lot of times it's not a blessing at all. So give yourself permission to look at a wide variety of types, including ones that you've never considered. The other one that happens a lot is thinker or feeler, right? Somebody's just like, I know for a fact I'm a thinker. I'm not one of those crazy feelers. And then they end up being one of those crazy feelers, right? And it's like, oh, feelers aren't crazy after all. They can be totally reasonable human beings.
Yeah. I was going to challenge this whole crazy feeler thing. It was hyperbolic. That's good.
It was. Well, I'm trying to embody how somebody else
of course
might not allow themselves to search for a different type.
Oh, we know what you really think now.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'll go the other direction. I can't be one of those terrible, unfeeling thinkers. I'm a kind person.
Truth. Now you're speaking accuracy. There you go.
I'm a good person. I must be a feeler, right? Unlike those unprincipled, hedonistic, cold thinkers. So whatever it is, or like I'm super organized. There's no way I could be a perceiver, or I'm so freeform and just love being in the moment. So there's no way that I'm a judger. It's like there's a lot of these assumptions that we make that oftentimes draw out the process. And in some ways, I think it's kind of good to do that. There's a value in all of a sudden thinking, oh, maybe I'm a thinker. Does that mean that thinkers can have values? Because I have values. There's really a lot of important self-discovery and system discovery that comes through by questioning our assumptions about how it all works and how we fit in how it all works.
I think I want to bring up a comment here too, though, that I've seen people be open to being a different type to the degree where they have landed on something that fits really well. And then they're like, but I got to keep exploring. And then they would hear a podcast like this and feel like, well, maybe I am a thinker. Maybe I've rested too early in this. And now they doubt and question again and open the loops all back up. So I don't know exactly what to speak to that, but I know that definitely comes up for people.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is also a phenomena of being unable to settle on a type, and that usually routes back to the question of what is not finding your best fit type? What purpose is that serving for you?
And that's what I was mentioning earlier. Some it's maybe like, and I was doing it really casual, like, between two types and then I don't have to grow, but there's probably some payoff for that, right? Some payoff to reopen that up yet again.
And maybe it's because a person is trying to teach themselves the system by trying on every type and trying to, almost like an individual experience of embodying, in the same way that we do like embodiment exercises at Proflyer training. If I can try this on, then I'll know what type I am. And I can understand the value in attempting that. There are some types that understand things much better through embodiment, and going through that as a way to try to teach oneself the system makes sense to me. But then there's a moment when it's not just intellectual anymore. It's like there are, and the individual will have to keep themselves, or keep their finger on the pulse of their intentions and motivations around all this. If they have landed on a best fit type and everything makes sense, but then they hear a podcast like this and reopen all of it, why did that need to happen? What is reopening doing for you? And so there's value in that too, taking a meta perspective and asking yourself what's going on for you whenever you want to, reopen the kimono. I
think that showcases exactly the value in the thrashing, in that there's an instinct when you hear something like this, potentially for some people, to reopen a questioning of type, because there's an undercurrent instinct that says there's a bunch of value in learning that I can get from that. And it's almost like I miss that. If I know my type, I'm missing out on the discovery process of myself that really doesn't have much to do about type. It's a question mark that allows me to discover a bunch of stuff. It's a container for that discovery. So I can see somebody going, oh, maybe I'm this other thing. And one of the unconscious reasons is it allows me to be in that learning frame again, to be absorbing information, to be open to possibilities about myself, to have an encounter with myself yet again. I'm not calcifying my type. I'm leaving it open and dynamic and flexible again. And there's a joy and a wonderful experience in that, right? In that first moment when you start to discover who you are and all the aspects that make up you. And there's a joy and almost a honeymoon period of sorts during that time period that you almost want to revisit, I think.
Like falling in love with falling in love?
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I love all the feelings that come along with discovering my type all over again. Yeah, I could totally see that. I also think that there is a sense of responsibility that we tend to believe we have once we have landed on our best fit type, to show up consistently with it. When we get really into type, those of us who are like, we're just like type nerds, right? We just love type and we talk about type all the time, and it's just the lens through which we see reality. If you're not one of those people, congratulations. But if you are, those of us who have a tendency to be sort of obsessed with this forget that we're not here to serve it. So when we land on our best fit type, there is sometimes a mentality or a desire to fit that type in all of the different ways you've read about it, or all the different ways in which it's been represented. And to be frank, the people who run around trying to, tell everybody that they don't have their type right are usually relying on the same things. They're also serving the system. ENTPs look this way, and if you aren't doing X, Y, Z, you can't be an ENTP, because my research has told me that ENTPs all fill in the blank, right? And it's like, well, there's like a lot of humans. There's like 8 billion, and there's a percentage of them that are ENTPs, and it's not an insubstantial percentage if the system is true. There's a lot of variance in there. So if you're looking for very specific markers, you might be disappointed to discover that there's a ton of ENTPs out there that have they don't give two craps about what your markers are. They don't care. But when we serve the system, we try to shoehorn ourselves into these descriptions, and we think other people should be doing the same thing. And I suspect that just merely shifting that perspective the other direction. I don't serve the system serves me. This is a tool that I'm using to make the unconscious conscious, to understand myself and others on a deeper level and have language around things that maybe felt really obscure before. When we do that, then when we're in a moment of self-discovery, it's a person who falls in love with falling in love, to go back to the previous metaphor, probably hasn't had a really rewarding relationship yet. They had a really awesome series of falling in loves, but then everything after that wasn't that great. Because once you have a really amazing relationship, yeah, you look back fondly on the time period you fell in love. It will always be special. But a really rewarding relationship has its own charm. It has its own beauty. And it's like, it's got a richness to it that you just kind of don't want to go back to the beginning, because you love where you're at so much and how it keeps evolving. And I think when a person lands on their best fit type and they've had this really exciting experience of that, when you build a relationship with it and you don't serve it, it serves you, and you start to understand how it's manifesting in all these different areas of your life, that's such a rewarding experience. And you don't want to go back to the beginning. Why would you want to? You've covered all this ground. You understand all this territory. And I think that helps sort of put it into perspective, that you don't have to keep going back to the drawing board, because there's more and better down the line. Now, I do want to continue to say, don't feel discouraged if you're not there yet. Or if you start questioning your type, don't be discouraged. There is a lot of value in that thrashing period. There's a lot of value in trying on all of those types and finding the one that fits like a glove. There's a lot of value in reevaluating it every once in a while and going, yeah, no, this is my best fit type. And then once you've got that best fit type and you're like, there's not a cell in my body that has any doubt about it, and not because I want it. There's nothing about this type I want, right? It just is. And I think that's the other piece, is trying to make ourselves into types that we think are more and less attractive, or we're trying to honor people in our lives. One of the reasons why I first tested out as an ENTJ in my Myers-Briggs or typology infancy is because I was trying to be somebody I wasn't in honor of the people in my family. And then once I realized that I was doing that, then I found my best fit type. So letting go of, there's sometimes loyalty things that are wrapped up in this, and trying to honor people, other people outside of ourselves, and trying to be this cool thing that we read somewhere or whatever it is, like all these different reasons why we attach to a type that isn't our type or isn't eventually our best fit type. There's, it's understandable a person would go through all of that. And then when you land on your best fit type and every cell is singing, right? The whole thing makes sense. Everything retroactively makes sense, and everything into the future makes sense. When you get to that place, it's really nice, and it's okay if it takes a while. And then after that, you can build that really rewarding relationship with yourself through the lens of that. And then some people get so discouraged they just drop the tool altogether and walk off. And I think what I wanted to do in this particular podcast is to go, just hang in there. It's going to be fine, right? Mistypes are not the end of the world. It doesn't mean anything necessarily. It doesn't mean you don't know the system. It doesn't mean you don't know yourself. It can mean those things. It can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. There's lots of modifiers in all of this. So if you're still on this journey, just keep going. It's cool. It's fine. And try not to let your own ego get too wrapped up in it, and try not to let other people's egos influence you to get too discouraged. Just, it's a good journey. Just let yourself have it.
And I think there is an access point for us on whatever we do know about ourselves to begin to apply that to our lives, and then we can figure more out. Like when we're working with our profiler training students, one of the things we say is look for low-hanging fruit. You can, if you see the person is clearly, like as you're profiling them and working with them, and it becomes clear they're an introvert, well, now you've eliminated 8 of the 16 Myers-Briggs types the moment they're an introvert, right? We're now in the category of introverted types. And so now we can think in terms of, okay, I'm talking to an introvert now. And so maybe that's all you know about yourself. Maybe all you know is I'm an introvert. I don't know all the rest of it yet, but I know I'm an introvert. Well, there's some growth you can do just knowing that. Like whatever you know about yourself, regardless of how much it is, there are things you can do to begin to grow and to begin to move on the journey. And I think there is growth in the discovery process as well. So I think that's the thing I would leave you with as you're listening is find the things you can act upon. And I really do believe action is the key. Taking action, getting reference experience, moving forward. It's like steering a ship when it moves out of the harbor is so much easier than trying to steer something that's just sitting still in the water. You move, you start to get into action, and you calibrate as you go. And I think that's the message I would like to leave with you listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think? You've been listening along with us. You haven't had a third microphone here to speak up audibly on this show, but me and Antonia would love to hear from you. And I think the community of Personality Hacker would also love to hear your perspective. What's coming up for you as we talk about this? Have you had the struggle yourself? Have you figured some things out? Do you have to restrain yourself from wanting to correct everybody because it's maddening that they're getting it wrong? You can clearly see this person's this type. It's like your hair is getting pulled out. You're like, I just need to tell them because it's so obvious. Oh, it's driving me crazy. Or, what's your experience? Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your personal story around some of these things. Again, personalityhacker.com. We want to have your voice heard here too.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, I read every single one. I do. I love them. I love the reviews. So if you want to leave a review, not just a rating, but a review, I would certainly appreciate it. Not that this was all just a big pitch to recommend profiling consultations, but it struck me at the end of this that we do offer a service here at Personality Hacker where you will walk through somebody who has been through our profiler training program and our advanced program and has become accredited as a profiler. And we have a stable of consultants who are highly qualified in helping you locate your best fit type. So for some people, that's like a moment on the journey for them. For others, it has been the culmination of a lot of work that they've done. And our consultants are like Sherpas. They help you get to where you're going, and they help guide the way for you to find your best fit type. So if that sounds interesting to you, head over to personalityhacker.com, and under our product catalog, you'll see consultations, and check that out to see if that's right for you. Also, if you are still on your journey and you want to understand more about the system and maybe read about all of the aspects of a type, particularly the cognitive functions, which really help clarify what's going on for an individual, you can check out our book. It's called Personality Hacker. It describes the system. It describes each of the functions and the type dynamics within each of those 16 types. So we highly recommend checking that out too. If a consultation isn't right for you, maybe the book is. So go check it out at all major book retailers, or you can special order it at your local bookstore to support local books. If you like it, you can also leave a rating review on Amazon or on Goodreads. That also helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.